Thank you for joining us and welcome to the webinar. I'm Rolfe of Mentoring Works. You know, while priorities often shift in this climate, one thing never changes. For organisations, people really are our greatest asset. And while most just say that, if you offer mentoring, you show you really mean it. That's why I love partnering with organisations that genuinely value their people and demonstrate it through mentoring. Strategically, mentoring is a cost-effective method for attracting, retaining and developing people, if you do it right. Just to tell you a little bit about Mentoring Works, we're all about mentoring for better outcomes. My company has been operating for 23 years. Mentoring Works has been instrumental in the success of hundreds of mentoring programs, and our products and services support people and programs throughout the world. So we know what can go wrong and how to avoid costly mistakes that are all too easy to make. And we know how to save you time and effort in creating mentoring conversations, mentoring relationships and programs that work. I want you to make the most of our time together today. So although some of you will have been on a webinar before, maybe you haven't, so just run through some of the basics. Webinars are interactive and you'll get the most out of this one if you're active rather than passive. So if you have pen and paper, make some notes for yourself and write down any questions that you have. There is a handout for this webinar which hopefully you've downloaded. The webinar is being recorded so that you can watch and listen later. Because the recorded webinar will be accessed by others who visit the website, just be mindful that you're speaking in a public domain. I'd love you to ask questions. If you want to ask a question or make a comment at any time, you have the facility to put up your hand. To put your hand up, there's an icon near the left at the top of your on-screen panel. Alternatively, you can type in your question and I'll read them out and respond. You do get a better result on a webinar if you have a headset too. At the moment, everyone who's online is muted to cut out any background noise. But I will call on people if you've got your hand up to make a comment or ask a question. But don't worry, I'll only call on you if you've got your hand up. After the webinar, members of the Mentoring Network can continue the conversation on the Members Forum. You can also access everything you need to create and maintain your mentoring program, including the manual designing, how to develop and run your own mentoring program. Whether or not you're a member, with your registration for this webinar, there is the bonus of a complimentary consultation, and you can book that, just email or phone for some available times. So let's start to look at planning your mentoring program. A mentoring plan for your program allows you to set up, manage and evaluate your mentoring so that you have a strategy for obtaining management commitment, you have a process for recruiting and matching your participants, you have the right structure and activities to support mentoring and ensure sustainability, and you have methods to evaluate and report your results, and you have a realistic budget for the project. And I'm wondering which of these is your major concern today. You might take a moment to jot that down on the handout. Which of these is your priority? Or perhaps they're all really important to you. Okay, I recommend a series of steps when you're planning to implement mentoring. And this is how they relate to those previous issues. So defining mentoring is the first step. Now it might seem quite obvious. In fact, I find whenever I talk to people about mentoring, people do have different ideas about what mentoring is and also what it isn't. So it's very important that for your mentoring program, you're very clear about what you want mentoring to be in that program. The second step is to decide why you want a mentoring program. Now, it may seem obvious, but this is a very important area to focus on. We'll get to that in a moment. You can then, having done these first two steps, you're in a better position to start to design your program, to actually look at the structure and the activities that will help you sustain the mentoring in your organisation. You need to develop training for all participants, and you want to pilot the mentoring program with a small group and evaluate the results. So let's see how these relate to the major issues. Now, if gaining management commitment was your top priority, then your focus is going to be on your definition of mentoring. What is mentoring in the context of this program within your organisation? You also want to pay a lot of attention to exploring why mentoring is important from the perspective of the organisation. You need to develop a value proposition and indeed a business case for mentoring for your organisation. And you're also going to need to focus very much on evaluation, because that will give management the feedback they need to remain committed to mentoring as a strategy in your organisation. If recruiting and matching is a major priority, and I know from our survey recently that this is a big issue for a lot of people, how do you actually recruit people into the mentoring program, how do you match them, then again your focus is going to be on the why mentoring, and this time looking at it from the point of view of individuals involved. What personal benefits are they going to gain? You also need to look at the design of your program, how you're going to structure it so that it suits the people that you want to be involved and supports those people in the program. In terms of supporting the mentoring and ensuring the sustainability of your program, this is where the design of your program is crucial. You need to have that structure, you need to have activities, you actually need to have a program of support that ensures that mentoring happens and that it continues over the life of the mentoring program. And I also believe that developing training is important, because you need to skill your people in mentoring and support them as they participate in the mentoring program. If evaluation is your focus, it's back to that second step of why mentoring, and from both the point of view of the organisation, the value proposition, the business case, and the individual personal benefits. And again, obviously you're going to focus on the evaluation step greatly. In terms of budget, budget is always important. You need to have the resources in terms of people, money and time delegated to your program if it's going to work. The design of your program may have constraints due to the amount of money that's available for that, or the amount of people or time that's available, and you need to look at those in the context. You also need to look at your evaluation in relation to the budget. Unfortunately, a lot of people see cutting out evaluation as a budget-free necessity, and sometimes that is. But in terms of ongoing funding after you've piloted your program, I'd suggest that you do want to look at your evaluation quite carefully so that you can in fact show the cost benefit of mentoring, so that you get budget for your next round of implementation. So let's start looking at this first step of defining mentoring, and this is the one that's crucial for gaining management commitment. So mentoring in the workplace is usually a confidential conversation about career-related issues. Mentoring, in my opinion, should be voluntary. It may be informal. There's certainly a lot of informal mentoring that occurs in the workplace, but it equally can be part of a planned program, and we're seeing a lot more of those these days. Mentoring is usually a relationship that occurs offline, and what I mean by that is the mentor is usually not in the direct line of authority of the person who is being mentored. In other words, not their manager or their manager's manager, so that they're offline, someone who doesn't supervise or manage the day-to-day performance of the person being mentored. Often the process is fairly non-directive, because we want mentorees to take self-responsibility for their decisions and their actions. This produces personal growth. In fact, for both parties, the mentor as well as the mentoree will gain and benefit. There will be specific beneficial results, and again, we're talking about a definition of mentoring here, and we'll be talking about why mentoring in a moment. So you want to look at what are the specific beneficial results you expect as outcomes of mentoring. And certainly we want mentoring to contribute to the strategic outcomes for the organisation and add value to the bottom line. Mentoring enables people to set and achieve their own goals, explore issues or problems, and make informed decisions about how to handle decisions, situations, or career management, career planning. The actual mentor's role can be described in this two-dimensional model. They elicit and they impart information, so it's a sharing of information. I do find that you need to train mentors to not to be too quick to give solutions or opinions or advice, not to get them to jump in straight away with a solution. And the other part of the mentoring role is to support and indeed to challenge the people that they're mentoring. So that's a real quick overview from my point of view of what mentoring is. I wonder what you think, and I'll pause for a moment and give you the opportunity just to put your hand up and speak, or indeed to type in if you have a different definition or something similar. What do you think mentoring is? Just waiting while you have the opportunity. If you don't want to type it in or speak, you certainly can write it down on your handout so that you're starting to formulate your own definition. In my opinion, it's most important that you have a definition for mentoring, your program. There are so many different ways of describing mentoring. I'm not prepared to say there's one correct answer to this. So you need an answer that works for you and your situation, the people you're incorporating into the mentoring program, and what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so Carly has typed in and said that mentoring is matching a more experienced person with a less experienced person, and certainly that's often the case. Someone else is saying someone who's been there, done that, paired up with another individual. Sue's saying it could be a peer, and indeed there are an increasing number of reciprocal mentoring arrangements where typically the traditional view of mentoring has been where someone is perhaps more senior either in age or in status or position in the organisation with someone who's younger or more junior, but that's not always the case. And reciprocal mentoring arrangements are becoming very much more popular and are very, very valuable. I've got a reciprocal mentoring arrangement myself, and my mentor and I meet once a month, and we meet for a couple of hours, and for 1 hour I will mentor him, and for the other hour he will mentor me. And it gives us a very safe and confidential environment where we can have conversations that allow us to move towards our goals with the assistance of another person. Okay, and Jim has actually typed in a question, and he's asking, can the mentor be your manager? And even though I said previously that generally mentoring occurs offline with someone who is not in the direct line of supervision or management of the individual, I'd have to say that yes, a mentor can in some circumstances be your manager. And if you talk to a lot of people, you will often find that they will name or identify a person that has been their manager in a previous job or in the current job, who has very much been a role model, has very much been a mentor to them. So I'm not ruling it out. What I'd suggest to you is that where mentoring is about career development and personal goals, it often helps to have someone who is not in that direct line, who is in fact offline, who can be a bit more objective and take a broader view, look at the bigger picture and have that very confidential conversation. Because what happens is, in a mentoring conversation where there's a really good relationship and a lot of trust, you can actually reveal a lot of your vulnerability to your mentor that you might not want to reveal to your manager. You're all hooked into high performance and being the best we can, which is as it should be. But it's nice to be able to, in the privacy and the confidentiality of a trusted mental conversation, to be able to reveal and share your uncertainties, your doubts when that's necessary, and also some of your aspirations that you might be either too modest or reluctant for a variety variety of reasons to discuss with your immediate supervisor or manager. So yes, it can be your manager, Jim, but in a structured mentoring program, it usually is not. The other exception to that is, and I have a client at the moment who's setting up a structured mentoring program where managers will mentor their subordinates. This is a very specific program where people are going to be doing a management course. They're actually going to go and do training with a third-party provider of management training. And the idea here is that they will have conversations with their managers before they go to the course to talk about why they're going to that course, why it's important, what sort of outcomes are expected, what sort of changes and behaviours they can bring back to the workplace, things they might do differently and better when they come back. Then the manager is going to, in the role of mentor, will have conversations with their subordinate about what's been learned at the course, how people think they could apply that, what specific actions they'll take, and then discuss, once they've started to take those actions, how they worked, and what the outcomes were, how they might modify what they did a little bit, and so on. So there's kind of a whole cycle of learning where the manager as mentor sets up the learning frame, discusses the course and what's learned in a classroom situation, how that comes back into the workplace, how that's acted upon, and what the results actually are. So that's a very useful way that a manager can be a mentor where it's directly about performance in the workplace, and that's an entirely appropriate subject for mentoring by managers, and something that I think should happen a lot more often, because then organisations would get more return on their investment in external training or even internal training. So thanks for that question, Jim. Okay, so let's move on to the implementation step number 2. Decide why you want a mentoring program. And mentoring is extremely popular, but often when I ask this question, maybe someone senior has said, okay, we're going to have a mentoring program, but maybe not a lot of thought has gone into this question of why. And there's an old saying, when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I would suggest to you that mentoring has to have a real strategic purpose, not just be used because it's popular. So we need to look at this from a strategic point of view. So why mentoring from a strategic point of view? What are the strategic objectives for the organisation? And later on we'll start to talk a little bit about the personal benefits of mentoring. So what you need to do is develop a value proposition, a business case that you can take to management to show why you want a mentoring program. And you must be able to state very clear reasons for mentoring in terms that are meaningful for all the stakeholders. If you don't do this, you won't be able to get the support, the people, or the resources that you need. So what sorts of things do organisations need? Well, most organisations implement a mentoring strategy with objectives related to employee engagement, getting people involved and committed and excited in the workplace, which means they are more productive. It could be about skills development, so actually skilling up people to perform their current roles better or preparing them for future roles. Often mentoring is instigated because there's an issue around knowledge management. We have an ageing workforce. We have the prospect in a lot of organisations of our most experienced and senior people coming up for retirement. And even though our newer, younger people are coming into the workplace very highly educated, they don't have the value of that corporate knowledge or that specialist knowledge that comes with years of experience in particular roles. And it's a very important strategic deficiency if experienced people are going to leave the organisation and leave a big gap in the knowledge behind them. And often mentoring is implemented because the organisation wants or needs to change establish the culture of the organisation, so the climate of the organisation, how we do things around here in a particular system. So I'm wondering which of these areas might be the key reason for mentoring in your organisation, or perhaps it's something else. So I suggest to you that you take a moment to jot down the key needs. You might want to jot down these headings and see how they fit with your strategic reasons for mentoring, or there might be something completely different. Whatever it is that your organisation needs, you need to be very clear on that, because that gives you the leverage you need to get your management committed to mentoring, to get the resources that you need to make the mentoring really work. And you might have to do some research to find out what's strategically important to your organisation and how mentoring will make a difference. You need to be able to make that business case that demonstrates the cost effectiveness of mentoring as a strategy. You need to be sure that mentoring is not simply being introduced because it's popular, because it's a buzzword, or because it's being expected to do things that are really quite unrealistic. It might be, realistically, it might be training that you need. It could be recruitment that you need. It could be a shake-up in systems, or it could be different leadership styles that are your problem. Is it really mentoring that's going to make the difference? Are you using a hammer when perhaps you need a drill or a screwdriver? So be clear why mentoring, what you hope to achieve from a strategic point of view in the organisation. And there's a lot more on this topic in our webinar we did last month called The Aims of Mentoring. You can view that for free on our website, and I strongly recommend that you do so. So now we need to look at what people want. And here you might have data from staff surveys or culture surveys, but you certainly will need to talk to people and really listen to what they have to say, because you want to use their own words in the promotion of your program. Remember, the participants are going to be stakeholders in the program too. You need them on board if the mentoring is going to work. And you might have your own agenda. You might have specific outcomes that you want mentoring to produce or achieve. But to get what you want, you need to satisfy the needs of others. We get what we want when we give other people what they want. So I'm going to pause for a moment and see if there are any questions or comments at this stage. So if you have a comment, you can put your hand up and I'll turn the microphone on, or if you prefer, you can type in a question. Okay, nothing coming in at the moment, so we'll move on to our next step, which is actually design your mentoring program. And you have this diagram in your handout. I'm going to go through each of the segments of this pie that make up the mentoring program design. And it's probably because of my bias as a trainer and the importance of training that I put training in that first area. And training is important because the people that are involved in your program really need to understand the strategic purpose. And this is important because even though they're enrolled in the mentoring program themselves, other people might influence their participation. So they need to be clear why this is important, not just to them as individuals, but also the organisation. In addition to that, they need to understand the role of the mentor, the responsibilities of both the mentor and the mentoree, and why they're actually doing what they're doing. And also what's beyond the role, what's not their role to do as a mentor or a mentoree, such as not undermining the authority of supervisors or managers, for example. They also need to be equipped with some strategies, and they need to look at the styles of mentoring and also develop some of the skills that they will need. Now, although training is first on our slide here, it may not be the first thing that you do. Sometimes you're going to pair the mentor and mentoree before they get to training. That's a very good philosophy as well. So in terms of pairing, getting your participants and pairing them up. My recommendation is that they should all be volunteers. Occasionally you do get a situation where people are told they're going to be put into a mentoring program to be mentored, or worse, told that they must mentor others, and that can present some difficulties. It can work, but you've got a very it's a tough gig too. If people are not volunteering, it's harder to get their commitment and their involvement than if they've actually put their hand up to be a part of this. I believe that you need to recruit and select mentoring participants with as much care as you would recruit and select an employee. So you want to develop your selection criteria. Who do you want to be your mentors? What attributes do you want them to bring to mentoring? If you do call for volunteers, what if you get more than you've actually got space for in your program? This happens a lot. So how will you choose who will and won't be involved? Likewise, with those who are going to be mentored, you need to have clear and transparent selection criteria, so that if you can't accommodate everyone in your program, then and perhaps you've got to put people on a wait list, you can give some reasons why some people got ahead of others. You do need to have a method of matching people, and there's a whole range of ways you can put people together, and I'll talk about that in a separate webinar. But you need to have thought this through and have a plan for how you're going to match the mentors with the mentorees. And my recommendation is that you facilitate their first contact. So the first time people come together, you actually have a structure and you support them in that very first meeting that they have. And part of that will be helping them to make some agreements about their mentoring relationship. So you want to equip them and help them negotiate their expectations. And people can often come to a mentoring relationship with completely different ideas about what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. So that facilitated first meeting that I spoke about, a large part of the agenda for that will be working out what people expect from one another. And you usually need to help them sort that out. You want them to clarify their goals for mentoring, maybe to start to write down the outcomes that they're hoping to get, and you certainly want them to talk about and make agreements about the logistics and the scheduling. What I mean by that is where and when and how often they're going to meet. Are they going to be able to get together face-to-face? If not, what's a good time to telephone? Do they have teleconferencing? Do they have video conferencing? Do they have other methods of having regular contact with one another? The next thing you need to work into your plan and have thought about and documented is accountability. So within the partnership, how are mentor and mentoree going to remain accountable to one another? Who's going to be in charge, if you like? Who's going to drive the mentoring relationship? What happens if they don't meet when they're meant to? So those sorts of accountabilities need to be worked out again in that first meeting that they have. There's also accountability in the program. You know, who's going to do what and how? How are you managing this program? Who's coordinating the events, and how will that happen? And you do have accountability to management. Now, they'll vary in what ways they hold you accountable, but you are responsible for a significant investment of resources when you manage a mentoring program. So how are you going to account for what you do with those resources? And it's not just money, it's your time, the time of other people, and the people that are involved. So what accountability is there? You also need to look at support, and this is a very underestimated part of your mentoring program. You need a program of support. You need to think about who mentors the mentors. I'm astonished that often we train our mentors, we're talking about mentoring, but then we don't provide mentoring for mentors. They've got perhaps no role models, they've got no one to discuss issues or difficulties that they're having with, and no ongoing assistance or advice if they run into difficulties. And that's quite a big ask. So you might want to think about mentoring for mentors themselves. You can also think about having some sort of mentoring network. It could be online or it could be face-to-face if all the people are in the same location. But I often find that mentorees want to talk to each other, not to betray any of the competencies of their conversations, but actually to support one another and ask questions and give ideas. Don't forget the coordinating team. That might be one person or it might be a team, but again, the person or persons responsible for implementing and managing the mentoring program, where do they get support from? Who do they take issues and problems to? Who's there to give them advice or support or answer their questions when they need it? And you do need a plan of support for the mentoring program itself. You can't simply wind it up and expect it to run the whole distance. It can run out of momentum. So you need a plan that actually gives your program a structure and gives support. And then you want to think about feedback within the partnership. I like to train mentoring partners to actually give and receive feedback at every single mentoring contact, whether it's face-to-face, over the phone or email. They should have a portion of their meeting time actually giving and receiving feedback about how that conversation went. Did they get what they wanted out of it? What could they do differently? What could they do better? And what will they do more or less of next time? Feedback is very important to keep the mentoring relationship actually on track. There needs to be ongoing coordination and ongoing monitoring of mentoring pairs. So the mentoring program coordinator or manager needs to be in touch with each of the pairs on a regular basis just to see how things are going, to see if they need any help, if they've got any questions, and if they're having difficulties, to try and sort out those difficulties before they escalate. It's very sad when you find that pairs have actually dissolved their relationship and didn't even tell the mentoring coordinator or manager. Mentoring coordinators need to literally have their finger on the pulse of how each of their relationships are going. And that way, if there are difficulties, they can sort them out before the mentoring relationship just falls apart. Linked in with accountability is gathering feedback that will be reported to management. And of course, mentoring conversations remain confidential, but you do need to collect information to document what's going on and actually feed that back to management so that they can see that the investment is a wise one and worth doing. And I recommend that you actually do group reviews. If it's at all possible, get your participants back in a room together midway through your mentoring program, and again at the event, at the end, in a final event, to review what actually happened, what worked well, and what recommendations they have to maybe do something differently in the future. So pausing again for any questions or comments that you might want to make. Okay, I'm going to go a little more deeply now into this issue of training, because it is such a major foundation, a major step in developing your program. And why train? Well, this is a question you have to have a good answer for. And I've found that for my clients, it's getting harder and harder to get people out of the workplace and into a training room. Also, you will find people who would say, I've been mentoring for years, or it's a natural process, or I did the course last year, do I really need to come? In my opinion, both mentors and mentorees need to be trained. Even experienced mentors need an orientation to the objectives of a particular program. And it's useful for them to meet and become part of a network of mentors and mentorees. I've actually found that when people get together like this, even though a mentoree might be partnered with one particular mentor, if they're in the same workshop, they get to meet the other mentors and they might feel a little bit more comfortable about approaching that person in the future if they need to, or communicating with that person in the workplace if they need to, and they feel like they're part of a network. They also have the opportunity to raise any issues or concerns and have their questions answered. It's particularly important for mentors to understand the strategic value of the person or the program, and that their contribution benefits the individual, but also contributes to building the capability of the organisation. Because it can be very difficult for people to justify taking time out of their day-to-day work in order to contribute to a mentoring program or be part of a mentoring program. So you need to address why it's important to build capability of the organisation. You also, as I said, want to facilitate that first mentoring meeting and the discussion of their expectations. And in a workshop, that's very easy to facilitate group activities where people identify a whole range of expectations. It's a very non-threatening way to do that. And then they individually can take the list that's been generated by the group and kind of use that as a bit of a guide or a checklist to work out what's going on for them. And when you do that in a training workshop, you can ensure that mentoring actually gets off to a good start. The other reason I'm an advocate of training, particularly for mentors, is I find they don't get it till they get it. And what I like to do with mentors is actually to give them an experience of mentoring, because you know what, you can show them and you can tell them, they can read all about the process and the techniques, but until they actually experience a real mentoring conversation, the empowerment of being listened to without being judged or told what to do, the amazing ability of people to find their own answers when given space and support to do so, the synergy that can occur when people are attuned to one another. They may not have the wherewithal to be the mentor they could be. That's why I love in my workshops to give mentors the opportunity to experience and practice a mentoring session. Now, it's not a role play, but it's a conversation about a real issue. It doesn't have to be a life-changing decision that they share. It could be quite simple, unrelated to work, but it must be real and meaningful to the person. I have each participant mentor and be mentored using the process and techniques we've explored in the session, and people always come away with a better appreciation of what mentoring really is. And sometimes when they discuss a real issue, the result can be quite profound. So in terms of education and training for mentoring, you need a range of resources that educate and prepare people for their mentoring roles, then support them to fulfill them. I suggest that you consider a 4-stage approach. Stage 1 is promotion. You want to educate not only prospective mentors and mentorees, but managers and staff not directly involved. You can do this through personal communication, so talking to people one-on-one or presenting at meetings. You can do management briefings, staff information sessions when you talk to a group. You can provide printed materials, audio-visual or web-based resources. And you can also put material on the internet that you draw them to, or you can email information out to them. The second stage of your education and training for mentoring is in your pre-work. This is where you're preparing people. If you have to minimise group face-to-face time, you'll need to deliver to individuals personally or in print, audio-visual, or do some web-based learning. So if you can only get people out of the workplace for a very short period of time, then your pre-work is going to be critical. The third stage is your actual workshops. You can't beat live interaction to fast-track mentoring relationships, but you may need to provide online learning as well, or instead. Now, I like to provide workshops for mentors separately from mentorees, if that's possible, and then have a group session with both together. Then comes stage 4, and this is the biggest part, your mentoring support program. It severely undermines your investment in mentoring if you train people and just leave them to it. You must have resources and personal follow-up for all participants. I recommend a midpoint group review and a final event. So now we're up to the step of piloting your mentoring program. It's wise to start with a small group of around 10 to 12 pairs and monitor the program closely. That way you can make any adjustments you need before you make decisions about taking the program broader. So a pilot program, just 10 or 12 pairs, recruited and selected with great care. You want people in this pilot program who have the most likelihood of making it success and getting the most out of it, and you monitor them very carefully to see how they're going. Once you've done that, you're in a much better position to roll out your program more broadly. Then we get to the evaluation phase. You want to really look at, did the relationships work? Did mentoring actually make a difference? And did it contribute worthwhile organisational as well as individual outcomes? What I suggest that you evaluate is, first of all, the processes. Processes such as your recruitment strategy, how you select people, match them, and also your coaching of the program. You want to also evaluate the relationships, were maintained for the life of the program, what was the quality and the satisfaction of those relationships. You also want to look at the support that was given, the training, materials, resources, and the activities that you provided for support. And of course, you need to look at outcomes for mentorees, also for mentors and the organisation. I suggest that you create an evaluation plan, and you want to, as part of that plan, make sure, and again this is where we're going back to defining mentoring and why you want mentoring. What are the attributes of success? What could you point to that would tell you that yes, this was worthwhile? What information do you need to gather in support or to identify whether or not the program was a success? What data sources will you use to get that information? What strategies or methods? Are there extraneous factors that could have an impact on the success or otherwise of your mentoring program or the outcomes that were produced? I know one program I ran year before last, there was actually a job freeze. This was a mentoring program that was actually aimed at career development, helping people move up in the organisation, and then they had a job freeze which actually prevented any new roles being created. So we had to take that into account when we looked at the effectiveness of the mentoring program. In fact, the program was a great success, and people wisely used the time to prepare for when the job freeze actually ended. So obviously in your evaluation plan you want to look at what's required in terms of reporting. Is a simple collation of the data sufficient, or do you want analyses and recommendations on the back of that? So the sorts of methods that you can use include before and after measures. So what can you objectively look at before and after to get an indication of the difference that mentoring made? You can do reaction surveys, which of course give you qualitative information from your participants. You might also ask your participants to keep a learning journal. Now this is something that has to be handled with some sensitivity, because they need to know that they don't have to hand in these journals. You simply want them to refer to the journal when you're gathering your information from them. You might have a monthly informal review, so you might ring around to people as part of your monitoring of mentoring and see how that's going, and you might document the data that you get. You could do individual interviews at the middle, at the end, or at any point in your mentoring program to gather that information. My recommendation is that you actually run focus groups or review workshops where you get as many as possible of the participants together. You can do this online, or you can do it in a live face-to-face workshop and with various processes, interactive processes, you can gather input that will be added to your evaluation. And you can do the good old survey questionnaire at the middle and or end of the program that talks about what outcomes have been achieved, people's level of satisfaction, etc. You'll only know if your mentoring is working if you have identified success indicators. So how are you going to measure success? And you need to do that right off the bat in your planning process at the beginning of thinking about introducing a mentoring program. You need to do early follow-up and see what's working, and if anything is not working or not working as well as you want it, you can follow up and hopefully rectify that. So you need to be monitoring people regularly. As I said, I recommend a midpoint review and a final event, and you also want to look at what you will measure post-program. Mentoring does give some immediate results, and you can collect that information, but some of the results will be longer term, and so you need to look at when and how you're going to evaluate those longer term results that don't occur instantaneously with mentoring. So here are our steps. Define mentoring, what it is, what it isn't. Think about why you want a mentoring program from a strategic point of view for the organisation and from a personal point of view of those involved. Design the program, the structure, the activities, the support mechanisms for mentoring over the life of your program. Develop your training. People do need to be trained in some form. How are you going to do that? What are you going to include in terms of content, and what's the process for delivering that? Pilot the program with a small group, keep in very close contact with them, see how things go and monitor it, and then you can look at the evaluation and rolling it out more broadly. So, any final comments or questions? Okay. I hope that, that this webinar has given you plenty of food for thought and perhaps generated some insight or some ideas for you. I'd like you to take a moment now to actually write on your handout what you've gained and how you might use it. Very important to capture your insights if you're going to actually get real value from them. So take a moment before we finish up to jot down what you gained and how you can actually use that. Now, because you registered for this webinar, you also have a complimentary consultation. We can talk about any aspect of your mentoring program, any question or issue related to mentoring that you care to discuss. So do call or email so we can set up that for you. I'm actually running a full-day public workshop on this topic called Mentoring, Developing Your Strategy, and that's with the Australian Institute of Management in Canberra on November the 25th, 2010. If you'd like more details, let me know. That will be a full day on the design of your mentoring program, implementing your mentoring program, and giving you the opportunity to work through some of the questions that I've raised for you in this webinar. If you are a member of the Mentoring Network, as I said earlier, you can continue this conversation in our discussion forum, and you can see here just some of the resources that you have available to you in our vault, in our library, if you like. You've got the manual, how to design and run your own mentoring program, which has the templates and formulas for working out the total design of your program, as well as a whole range of other resources. So if you're not a member of the Mentoring Network, I urge you to join, or at the very least you might wish to purchase the How to Design and Run Your Own Mentoring Program manual that's available on our website. My aim in this webinar was to give you something to think about and use, and I hope you'll come back and share some of your ideas in our next Mentoring Works webinar next month. Keep an eye on the newsletter for your special invitation. Thank you very much for participating, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.